When the private jet touched down on the executive airport runway, no one could have imagined who was inside, least of all Regina, who, just a year before, had thrown her own mother's clothes into trash bags and screamed that she was a dead weight, that she should leave and never come back. But she did come back. And what happened next caused Regina to fall to her knees on the floor of her own house. A house that, by the way, was never really hers. But to understand what happened that day, I need to take you back a year, to the coldest and most cruel night. That Ms. Johnson, or Saida as everyone called her, had ever lived through in her 68 years. A night that changed everything. The night that destroyed a family, and a night that, ironically, was the beginning of the best phase of a woman's life. A woman who thought she had nothing left to look forward to. Saida was a black woman, with a large and generous body, her short white hair neatly cropped close to her head, and hands that had known hard work since she was 7 years old. Her skin was the color of strong coffee, the kind she brewed every morning. Her eyes, though tired, still held a spark of life that decades of hard work hadn't managed to extinguish. She had worked 45 years as a cook in one of the most famous restaurants in the city, Taste of Home. It was a restaurant serving traditional comfort food that welcomed politicians, business people, artists. Everyone came to eat Saida's food, although most didn't even know her name. To them, she was just the cook, the invisible woman behind the delicious dishes. 45 years waking up at 4 in the morning, 45 years taking the 5 o'clock bus, squeezed in among workers as tired as she was. 45 years standing in front of hot stoves, with sweat running down her back, with her feet swollen at the end of the day. 45 years chopping, frying, seasoning, creating. 45 years feeding strangers, while her own family barely saw her. But Saida had a secret she had kept for 30 years, a secret that neither her daughter, nor her son-in-law, nor her grandchildren knew, a secret that would change everything. If you think you already know what's coming, you're wrong, because this story has twists that even I didn't expect when I first heard it. Back in 1992, when Saida's salary was barely enough to pay the bills and buy food for the week, something extraordinary happened. There was a customer at the restaurant, a young man, around 25 years old, who came every day for lunch. He always ordered the cheapest item on the menu. He always sat at the same table, in the back, near the kitchen. He always brought papers, documents, charts that he studied while he ate. His name was Robert Miller, and he was trying to start a tech company in a country that didn't yet know what the internet was. Saida watched him from the kitchen. She saw that sometimes. He didn't have enough money to pay the bill completely. She saw that he left the exact change on the table, with no tip, because those were probably the last coins he had. She saw the desperation in his eyes, mixed with something she recognized. Hope, the same hope she had when she was young and thought life could be different. One day, Saida did something she had never done before. She prepared an extra portion of chili, the best chili in town, and personally took it to Robert's table. He looked at her confused. "I didn't order this. I know. It's a gift. You look like you need to eat something good today." Robert started to protest, but Saida was already heading back to the kitchen. From that day on, something changed. Saida always gave Robert extra portions. Sometimes, when he seemed sadder than usual, she would prepare a special dessert for him, a flan, a piece of chocolate cake, something sweet to sweeten the bitter days. She never asked him for anything in return. She never expected anything. She only did what her heart told her was right, because Saida had learned, from a very young age, that kindness needs no reason. Kindness is its own reward. A year passed. Robert kept coming to the restaurant, but something had changed in him. He no longer seemed so desperate. His clothes were nicer. His eyes shone with a confidence that he didn't have before. One day, after eating, he asked to speak with Cedar. The cook came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, wondering what the man wanted. "Miss Johnson, I need to tell you something." Cedar sat down across from him, curious. "My company is growing, a lot. In the next few months, we're going public. We're going to sell stock on the stock market." Cedar didn't understand any of that. Stock market. Stocks. They were words from another world, a world she didn't belong to. "I know you don't understand these things, but I want you to know one thing. During the hardest year of my life, you were the only person who treated me like a human being. You fed me when I had no money. You gave me hope when I wanted to give up. And I will never forget that." Robert placed an envelope on the table. "Here's some information on how to buy stock in my company. I know you don't have much money, but if you have something saved, something you can invest, I promise you, you won't regret it." Cedar looked at the envelope. She looked at Robert, and then she did something. That would change her life forever. She went home that night and opened the shoebox, where she kept her savings, $3,000, everything she had saved in 20 years of work, penny by penny, depriving herself of everything, to have something for emergencies. The next day, she went to the bank and bought stock in a company that no one knew, a company with a strange name that she couldn't pronounce, a company that 20 years later would be worth billions of dollars. That company became one of the largest technology companies in Latin America. And Cedar, the cook who never finished school, had $8 million in an account that no one knew existed. But here comes the part that no one understands, the part that makes this story different from all the others. Cedar never touched that money. She never changed her life. She never bought a bigger house. She never stopped working. She never told anyone what she had. Why? Because Cedar wanted to know something. She wanted to know if her family loved her, for who she was, or for what she had. And a year ago, she got her answer, an answer that broke her heart into 1,000 pieces. If this story is already touching something inside you, if you already feel that this is going to be different, stay, because what comes next is much worse and much better. And if at any point you feel you need to pause, to breathe, do it, because this story deserves to be felt, not just heard. Regina was Cedar's only daughter. She was born when Miss Johnson was 23, the result of a love that didn't last. Regina's father was a man who promised the world and disappeared when he found out about the pregnancy. Miss Johnson never saw him again, never received a dime from him, never had the chance to tell her daughter who her father was, because she herself didn't know where he was. Miss Johnson raised Regina alone, working double shifts, leaving the little girl with neighbors when she had no other choice, sacrificing her own youth, her own dreams, her own life, so that her daughter would have what she never had. She paid for private school when all the other girls in the neighborhood went to public school. She paid for English lessons, ballet, piano. She paid for the most beautiful Sweet 16 party in the neighborhood, with an imported dress and decorations that Miss Johnson took 6 months to pay off. She paid for college, 4 years of business administration at a private university, while Ms. Johnson worked from 4 in the morning until 10 at night to cover the tuition. And when Regina married Mark, a businessman who thought he was more important than he was, Ms. Johnson did something more. She used part of her savings, the savings that no one knew she had, to buy a house for them, a big, beautiful house in a good neighborhood, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a 2-car garage, a yard with green grass or quay and a small swimming pool. The dream of any middle-class family. Miss Johnson put the house in Regina's name because she trusted her daughter, because she thought that the love of a mother and daughter was stronger than any piece of paper, because she never imagined that one day she would be betrayed in the worst way possible. How wrong she was. How terribly wrong. For years, Ms. Johnson lived in that house. She had a room in the back, next to the laundry area, a small room, with a single bed, an old wardrobe, and a window that looked out onto the neighbor's wall. But for Ms. Johnson, it was enough. It was a roof. It was close to her daughter. It was where she could watch her grandchildren grow. Lucas came first, a boy that Ms. Johnson raised practically alone, because Regina and Mark were always busy working. It was Ms. Johnson who changed the diapers, who warmed the bottles at 3 in the morning, who taught him his first words, who ran after him when he started to walk. But Lucas grew up differently. He grew up glued to screens, distant from the real world, indifferent to everything that wasn't his cell phone and his video games. At 16, he barely spoke to his grandmother, barely looked at her. It was as if she was just another piece of furniture in the house. Then came Amanda, a girl with big eyes and a sensitive heart, who seemed to be the only one who really saw her grandmother. Amanda was different. Amanda sat with Ms. Johnson in the kitchen to learn recipes. Amanda asked to sleep in her grandmother's room when she had nightmares. Amanda was the only light in a house that was becoming increasingly dark. But things started to change when Mark started to lose money. When his businesses, which were never as solid as he pretended, began to crumble like a house of cards in a strong wind. Mark thought he was a business genius. He had opened an import company for electronic products, taking advantage of contacts he had in China. At first, the money flowed. New cars, trips, brand-name clothes, expensive restaurants. Regina had never lived so well. But Mark didn't understand administration. He didn't understand taxes. He didn't understand that temporary success doesn't guarantee permanent success. And when the government changed the import rules, when taxes went up, when competition increased, Mark didn't know what to do. The debts accumulated. The banks started calling. The suppliers stopped trusting him. And Mark, instead of facing reality, instead of admitting that he had failed, started looking for someone to blame. The first one to blame was the government, then it was the employees, then it was the economy, and finally, the one to blame was Ms. Johnson. Not directly, of course. Mark was too cowardly to confront his mother-in-law, but he started planting seeds in Regina's head, poisonous seeds that germinated into something horrible. Your mother eats too much. Your mother uses too much electricity. Your mother takes up space that we could use. If you sold the house, we could get out of this situation. Regina, who had always admired Mark more than she should have, started to believe it. She started to see her mother with different eyes, eyes of resentment, eyes of contempt, eyes that didn't see the woman who had sacrificed everything for her, but rather an obstacle that prevented her prosperity. The comments started small. Ms. Johnson, you don't need to eat so much. Food is expensive. Ms. Johnson, don't turn on the air conditioning. The electricity bill is too high. Ms. Johnson, why don't you look for a nursing home? You'd be more comfortable with people your age. Ms. Johnson listened in silence. She felt each word like a stab in the heart. But she kept going. She kept cooking. She kept cleaning. She kept caring. Because it was her daughter. Because it was her family. Because a mother's love has no conditions, but a daughter's love apparently does. A daughter's love, at least this daughter's love, had a price. And when that price stopped being paid, the love disappeared. The night of the eviction was a Thursday in July. Ms. Johnson remembers it with painful precision because it was the birthday of her late mother, Mrs. Josephine, who had died 30 years ago, but whose memory Ms. Johnson honored every year with a cake and a prayer. Ms. Johnson had spent the afternoon in the kitchen, preparing a chocolate cake with fudge frosting, her mother's favorite cake, the cake that Mrs. Josephine made for her when she was a child, in times of extreme poverty, when a cake was a luxury that only appeared once a year. While the cake was baking, Ms. Johnson looked out the window. The sky was grey, threatening rain. The wind was blowing hard, shaking the trees in the yard. There was something in the air that night, something heavy, something that announced a storm. Regina arrived home from work at 7 in the evening. She came in without saying hello, with a tense face on tight lips on hard eyes. Mark had arrived earlier, and the two had had a long argument in the bedroom, with the door closed. Ms. Johnson heard the shouting from the kitchen. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Something bad had happened, something very bad. Finally, the bedroom door opened. Regina came down the stairs with firm, determined steps. Mark was behind her, with his head down, like a dog following its owner. "Mom, we need you to sign some papers." Regina entered Ms. Johnson's room without knocking, without asking permission, as if that space didn't deserve respect. Ms. Johnson was sitting on the bed, with an old photo of her mother in her hands. The photograph. Ms. Johnson held it tight. It showed Donna Josefa smiling, young and beautiful, before life had weathered her so harshly. "Just need you to sign here. Heads for a few things at the bank." Regina placed the papers on the bed next to a pen. She didn't even look her mother in the eye. Cedar picked up the documents. She read them carefully, even though her eyesight wasn't as sharp as it used to be. They were property transfer papers, transferring ownership of the house she had bought, the house she had given to her daughter. "Daughter, what is this?" "I already told you they're bank papers. We need your signature." "But it says property transfer here. You want me to transfer the house?" Regina sighed impatiently. "Yes, Mom. We need to sell the house. It's the only way to pay off Mark's debts. If we don't sell, we're going to lose everything. But this is my house. I bought it." And then Regina laughed, an ugly laugh, full of contempt, full of poison. "You bought it? With what money, Mom? You're a cook. You earn minimum wage. You've never had money for anything. Robert Miller helped us with the down payment. Have you forgotten already? This house is ours, not yours. You only live here because we're nice." Miss Johnson felt like she had been slapped. Her daughter's words stung more than any physical blow, because they were lies, all lies. The house had been bought with Cider's money, money that Regina never knew existed. But Miss Johnson didn't argue. She didn't have the strength. She just shook her head. "I'm not going to sign, Regina." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Regina looked at her mother with eyes that Miss Johnson had never seen before, eyes of pure hatred. "What did you say?" "I said I'm not going to sign." And then Regina exploded, like a bomb that had been waiting for the right moment to detonate, like a volcano that finally releases all the lava accumulated over years. What happened in the next 30 minutes was something that Miss Johnson would never forget. Words that cut deeper than any knife. Insults that destroyed 45 years of maternal love in minutes. Accusations that had no basis in reality. "You're a dead weight. All you do is eat, take up space, and produce nothing. Looking at you is embarrassing. Fat, old, classless. My friends ask why I have a maid living in my house and I don't know what to tell them. Because that's what you look like, Mum. An old maid that nobody wants." Each word was a blow. Each phrase was a wound that would never fully heal. Regina opened Miss Johnson's closet and started throwing her clothes into black trash bags. Old dresses that Cedar had worn for years. The blouse she had worn at Lucas's baptism. The dress she had bought for Amanda's graduation. All thrown into trash bags, as if they were worthless. As if Miss Johnson's life was worthless. Robert Miller appeared in the doorway with his arms crossed, saying nothing. He just watched. He just observed his wife destroying his mother-in-law, without lifting a finger to stop her. Coward, miserable, silent accomplice to a cruelty that has no name. Lucas was in the living room, with his headphones on, staring at his phone. He heard the scream bar, but he didn't get up. He didn't interfere. He didn't care. His grandmother, the woman who had raised him, was being destroyed in the next room, and he was playing video games as if nothing was happening. Only Amanda from her room cried in silence. She wanted to go down. She wanted to defend her grandmother. But she was 14 years old, and afraid of her mother, afraid of what would happen if she got involved. So she cried. Cried alone, hugging her pillow, while she listened to the screams that were destroying her family. Get out of my house. Get out now, and don't come back. I don't want to see you again. I don't want my kids to see you. I don't want you to soil this place anymore with your presence. Ms. Johnson grabbed a small suitcase, with trembling hands, with a broken heart. She put in some clothes, her documents, the old photo of her mother that her fingers still clutched. She looked at her daughter one last time. Regina's face was red with rage, the veins in her neck throbbing. Her eyes injected with something that looked like madness. There was nothing of the girl that Cedar had raised, nothing of the baby she had held in her arms, nothing of the love that she had given for 45 years. One day, you're going to understand, Regina. One day you're going to understand what you did today. Ms. Johnson left the room. She walked down the hallway. She passed the living room where Lucas didn't even look up. She passed the kitchen where her mother's birthday cake was still cooling. She reached the front door. She opened it. She went out. The door closed behind her with a final slam, and with it, 45 years of sacrifice and of unconditional love, of sleepless nights taking care of fevers and nightmares, of wages spent on schools and parties, of dreams abandoned so that her daughter could dream. All finished, all destroyed, in 30 minutes of cruelty that felt like 30 years. Ms. Johnson stood on the sidewalk with a suitcase and nowhere to go. The rain started to fall, first small drops, then heavier, until it became a downpour that soaked her completely. But she didn't move. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just stood there whining under the rain, looking at the house she had bought, the house she had given, the house from which she had just been expelled like trash. It was then that Sonia appeared. Sonia was the next-door neighbor, a 55-year-old woman, divorced, who had lived alone since her children had moved to other cities. She had brown hair with grey streaks, a slender body, and the kindest eyes that Miss Johnson had seen in a long time. She had seen everything from her window. She had seen the trash bags being thrown on the sidewalk. She had heard the screams through the walls. She had seen Miss Johnson leave, alone, under the rain that was beginning. Miss Johnson, come with me. I have a spare room. Come on, don't stay here. Miss Johnson looked at Sonia. The rain ran down her face, mixing with tears that were finally starting to come out. Silent tears. Tears of a lifetime of sacrifice thrown in the trash. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you. Miss Johnson walked to Sonia's house. She went in. She sat on the living room sofa, soaked, trembling, with the suitcase clutched against her chest, as if it were the only thing she had left in the world. Sonia brought towels, dry clothes, a cup of hot tea. She didn't ask questions. She just cared. She was just present. She just did what any decent human being would do for another human being in suffering. That night, while the rain battered the city and the lightning illuminated the sky, Miss Johnson told Sonia the truth. She told her about the stocks, about the millions, about the 30-year secret. Sonia couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her eyes widened more and more with each revelation. Her mouth just dropped open in utter astonishment. Miss Johnson, you have all that money. So and you never said a word. Why? Why did you suffer so much when you could have lived like a queen? Saida sighed, a long sigh, heavy with decades of pain and frustrated hope. Because I wanted to know, Sonia. I wanted to know if they loved me for who I am or for what I have. I wanted to know if my daughter really loved me or if she just put up with me because she had no choice. Now I know the answer. And it's the most painful answer I could have ever received. And what are you going to do now? Are you going to tell Regina? Are you going to show her? You have the money. Saida looked out the window, toward the house, from which she'd been thrown out. The lights were on. Regina was probably celebrating, having gotten rid of the dead weight. Mark was probably planning how to sell the house. He thought was his. No, Sonia, I'm not going to tell them anything. I'm going to do something different. Now. I'm going to live. For the first time in 68 years, I'm going to live for me. I'm going to see the world. I'm going to do everything I never did, because I was too busy taking care of everyone else. And when the time is right, I'm going to come back, and they're going to know exactly who they were dealing with. Sonia felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in Sida's voice, something new, something powerful. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was dignity, reclaiming its place. That was a year ago. And what happened in those 12 months is something that seems straight out of a movie about rebirth, about discovery, about a woman who found her worth after spending her whole life being treated as if she had none. But before I go on, I need to ask you a question that only you can answer. Have you ever been treated like you were worthless? Have you ever been made to feel like you were a problem, a burden, something to be gotten rid of? Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone who was supposed to love you and seen only contempt if the answer is yes? Then this story is for you, because what comes next is proof that dignity always finds its way back. Always. The day after the expulsion, before dawn, Sida did something she had never done before, something that changed the course of her life, forever. She took Sonia's phone, dialed a number she had memorized, and waited. Dr. Henrique. It's me. Miss Johnson. On the other end of the line, a male voice, serious one, professional, one responded. Miss Johnson. What a surprise. Is everything all right? It's been months since you called. No, Dr. Fonseca. Everything is not all right. But it will be. I need you to help me. Dr. Henrique Fonseca was a 60-year-old lawyer, specializing in wealth management. He had met Sida 20 years earlier, when Robert Miller, the young entrepreneur she had helped, had brought her to his office to help her organize the shares that were now worth millions. Since then, Dr. Fonseca had managed Sida's fortune in absolute silence, reinvesting the dividends, diversifying the assets, paying the taxes, all without anyone else knowing, all under a confidentiality agreement that had never been broken. Tell me, Ms. Johnson, what do you need? I want to travel, Dr. Fonseca. I want to see the world. I want to see all the places I always wanted to see and never could, because I was busy working and taking care of others. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ms. Johnson, with all due respect, you've never shown any interest in spending your money. In 20 years, you haven't touched a penny beyond what was absolutely necessary. What's changed? Everything, Doctor. Everything has changed. My daughter threw me out on the street yesterday, called me deadweight, threw my clothes in garbage bags, and she doesn't even know I have that money. She never knew. Dr. Fonseca sighed. I can hear the pain in your voice, Ms. Johnson, and I'm glad. You finally decided to live your life. You deserve it. Count on me for whatever you need. And so began the most incredible year of Aparecida Santos's life. The first trip was to Hawaii. Sida had always seen photos of those pristine beaches in old magazines. She found in the diner green and blue waters that seemed out of this world, white sand that shimmered in the sun, a paradise that she thought she could never know. Now, she was there, with her feet buried in the warm sand, with the sun warming her dark skin, with the sea breeze caressing her white hair, watching a sunset that seemed hand-painted by the gods. She cried, for the first time since the expulsion. Sida cried, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation. Tears of a woman who had finally given herself permission to exist. She spent a week in Hawaii, swam with sea turtles, snorkeled in crystal-clear waters, ate fresh seafood, prepared by other cooks, and for the first time in 45 years, she didn't have to cook for anyone. Afterward, it was on to Greece. She had always dreamed of Greece. She had seen movies, had read books, had imagined what it would be like to walk through the white streets of Santorini. And now she was there, walking through cobbled alleyways, admiring blue and white houses that looked like they were out of a fairy tale, eating in small tavernas where the owner treated her like family, learning to say Efcharisto, which means thank you in Greek. People looked at her. A black woman, older, large-bodied, traveling alone. Some with genuine curiosity, others with poorly disguised prejudice. But Saida didn't care. For the first time in her life, she didn't care what others thought, because others hadn't lived her life, hadn't suffered her pains. They had no right to judge. She went to Italy next, visited Rome with its ancient ruins and its millennia of history, threw a coin into the Trevi fountain and wished for peace, only peace, no revenge, no wealth, only peace. She went to Florence, the cradle of the Renaissance, cried in front of the statue of David by Michelangelo, not for the beauty of the sculpture, although it was impressive. She cried because she never thought that a woman like her, a black cook from a poor neighborhood in Brazil, could be in a place like that, but she was, and no one could take that away from her. She went to Venice, rode in a gondola through the canals, ate real Italian pasta, and thought that maybe her recipe wasn't so different. Maybe the love she put into her food was the same secret ingredient that the Italians used. She went to Japan after, a leap of continents that seemed impossible for the girl who grew up in a neighborhood without running water. Walked through Zen gardens in Kyoto, learned about the philosophy of wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection, visited Buddhist temples where monks in orange robes meditated in silence, ate fresh sushi in fish markets, learned to make respectful bows. An elderly monk, in a temple lost in the mountains, told her something she would never forget. Your energy. It's the energy of someone who has suffered greatly. But your energy is also the energy of someone who has never let that suffering define them. That is rare, that is precious, and don't you ever lose it. Ms. Johnson smiled and thanked him in Japanese. Arigatou gozaimasu. One of the many phrases she had picked up in her travels. She went to Portugal after that, the land from where the colonizers came, the land from where those who enslaved her ancestors came. And instead of hatred, she felt something different. She felt like she was reclaiming a space that had always belonged to her. She felt like she was walking on streets that her great-grandparents could never walk on as free people. She felt that every step she took was a victory, not against Portugal, not against the Portuguese, but against the entire history of oppression that had tried to tell her that she was less. She was not less. She had never been less. They had just made her believe that she was, during all this time. She kept in touch with Sonia. She sent photos on WhatsApp, voice messages, telling her about her adventures, postcards from every place she visited, because Sonia had told her that she loved receiving postcards. And Sonia, faithful to the pact they had made, didn't say anything to anyone. When the neighbors asked about Ms. Johnson, Sonia said she didn't know. When Regina showed up, desperate to find her mother, Sonia said she had no information, because that was what Saida had asked for. Time. Time to heal. Time to be reborn. Time to find herself, before facing the past. Meanwhile, back at Regina's house, things were getting more complicated. Every single day, Mark lost his last big client, 3 months after Saida's expulsion, a multi-million-dollar contract. That went to the competition because Mark had made promises he couldn't keep. The company, which was already in bad shape, collapsed completely. The debts piled up. The debt collectors started calling, at all hours, Letters from banks arrived daily, threats of repossession, threats of lawsuits, and Regina, in desperation, had an idea, the only idea she had left. We're going to sell the house. She went to the county recorder's office to start the process. She brought all the documents she had. She was sure the house was hers. Her mother had never had money. It must have been a recording error, something they could easily correct. But when the clerk at the recorder's office checked the records, his face changed. Ma'am, this property is registered under the name Aparecida Santos. You cannot sell it without her authorization. Regina felt like she had been punched in the stomach, like someone had sucked all the air out of her lungs. That can't be. That house is mine. My mother doesn't have money to buy anything. She's a cook. She earns minimum wage. The clerk checked the papers again. I'm sorry, ma'am, the records are clear. The property was acquired in 1998 by Aparecida Santos, paid in cash. There is no mortgage. There are no liens. Everything is properly registered. In her name. Paid in cash. Her mother, the cook who supposedly never had money for anything, had paid for an entire house, in cash, without financing. How was that possible? Regina left the recorder's office, stunned. Her mind couldn't process the information. Everything she thought she knew about her mother was being called into question. Everything she thought was true seemed to be a lie. She ran to Sonia's house. She rang the doorbell, hard, almost breaking the door. Where is my mother? I need to talk to her. Now. It's urgent. Sonia opened the door, calmly. Her face showed no emotion, neither fear, nor anger, nor sympathy, just calm. I don't know where she is, Regina. And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. But I need her to sign some papers. It's urgent. We're going to lose everything if she doesn't sign. Sonia approached Regina. So close. She could see the veins pulsing in her neck. So close. She could smell the cheap perfume she used. You threw your mother out on the street, like she was garbage. You called her dead weight. You threw her clothes in black plastic bags. And now you want her signature. You want her to help you. Sonia laughed. A cold, humorless laugh. You're lucky that Ms. Johnson is a good woman. Because if it were me, I would have already called the police. I would have already filed a report for elder abuse. I would have shown the whole world what kind of daughter you are. Regina paled. Don't look at me like that. You know exactly what you did. And one day, you're going to pay for it. Not because I want it, because life always collects, always. And Sonia closed the door in her face. Hard. Final. The months passed. Regina tried everything. She hired a private investigator, the best she could afford, with what little she had left. But Saida had learned to be discreet. She traveled with a different name on her hotel reservations. She used credit cards that weren't linked to her public name. She was a ghost who had decided to disappear. She searched hospitals in the city and neighboring cities. She thought maybe her mother was sick. Maybe she had had a heart attack, a stroke. Maybe she was in a hospital bed, alone, with no one to take care of her. But no, nothing. No record of Aparecida Santos in any hospital in the region. She went to the police. She wanted to file a missing person report, but the officer explained to her that he couldn't report someone as missing who had left of their own free will. Saida was an adult woman, capable, who had decided to leave. It wasn't a crime. It was a choice. And while Regina sank into despair, Saida blossomed in Portugal. Saida met a group of Brazilian women who lived in Lisbon. There were 6 women of different ages and backgrounds who had met in a support group for immigrants. Mary, 40 years old, who had left an abusive husband in Sao Paulo. Cleo, 60, who had lost her husband and decided to start over in another country. Roxanne, 35, who was looking for better job opportunities. Marty, 50, a psychologist who had come for a doctorate and never returned. Lucy, 45, who fled from a family that didn't accept her sexuality. And Beth, 70, the oldest of the group, a widow who sold Brazilian crafts at the fairs in Lisbon. They became friends, real friends, the kind Cedar had never had. Women who didn't judge her for her body, for her color, for her age. Women who saw her for who she was, not for what she had or didn't have. They had lunch together every Sunday. They shared stories, tears, laughter. They celebrated birthdays, comforted losses, supported dreams. For the first time in 68 years, Cedar had a tribe, a group of women, who loved her unconditionally, and that was worth more than any amount of money. One day, after a few glasses of Portuguese wine, Dr. Miller, the psychologist, asked Ms. Johnson about her story. She wanted to understand why such a strong woman had left everything behind and come to Portugal alone. Ms. Johnson, who now fully trusted the group, told them everything: the secret fortune, the cruel daughter, the expulsion, the search to know if she was loved for who she was. When she finished speaking, there was silence at the table. Watery eyes, clenched hands. Dr. Miller was the first to speak. Ms. Johnson, what your daughter did to you has a name. It's called abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, elder neglect. It doesn't matter that she's your mother. It doesn't matter that you raised her. What she did was a crime against your dignity, against your humanity, against everything you should be able to expect from a daughter. Ms. Johnson lowered her eyes. But she's my daughter. I raised her. I must have done something wrong for her to be like that. Dr. Miller shook her head firmly. No, Ms. Johnson, that's not how it works. Being a mother doesn't mean accepting everything. Being a mother doesn't mean letting yourself be destroyed. You gave her life, but that doesn't give her the right to take yours. You gave her love, but that doesn't mean you have to accept contempt. The other women nodded. Some had gone through similar things. Some had their own scars from families that had hurt them. Those words changed something inside Ms. Johnson. For the first time in her life, she stopped feeling guilty. For the first time, she understood that the problem wasn't her, that the love she had given was real, was genuine, was enough, and that if that love hadn't been reciprocated, it wasn't her fault. It was then that she started writing a journal. She bought a brown leather notebook in an old Lisbon stationery store, a notebook with yellowed pages, like the old books she had always admired, but never been able to afford. And she started writing everything: her travels, her discoveries, her emotions. She pasted photos, airplane tickets, restaurant napkins with scribbled notes. Each page told a story of rebirth, and in that journal, she also wrote letters to Regina that she was never going to send. Letters where she said everything she could never say out loud. Daughter, I loved you from the moment I knew you were coming. I loved you when you cried all night and I didn't sleep. I loved you when you yelled at me that I was unfair for not letting you go out. I loved you when you married a man I didn't like, and that I knew was going to make you suffer. I loved you even when you threw me out on the street with garbage bags filled with my own life. But loving doesn't mean accepting everything, and I, after 68 years, finally learned that. I don't hate you, Regina. Hate would be giving you too much importance, but I'm not going to let you hurt me again, because I also deserve love. I also deserve respect. I also deserve to be seen. And if you can't give me that, I'm going to find those who can. 6 months after the expulsion. Something changed. Something that even Ms. Johnson didn't expect. She was in Paris, sitting in a cafe in front of the Eiffel Tower, drinking a latte and eating a butter croissant. The afternoon sun painted the sky orange and pink. The tower shone like gold. Her phone rang. It was Dr. Henrique. Ms. Johnson, I apologize for the inconvenience, but I have important news. Ms. Johnson put the croissant on the plate. News from Dr. Henrique was rarely simple. Tell me, Doctor, your daughter's husband, Mark, I did an investigation on him, as you asked me to, and I discovered something interesting. Ms. Johnson leaned forward, intrigued. Mark has a considerable debt with a factoring company, a debt of several million. And it turns out that company belongs to a holding company of which you are the majority shareholder. Ms. Johnson almost choked on her coffee. What does that mean, Doctor? It means that, technically, Mark owes you money. The debt he has is with a company that you control, and if you wanted to, you could execute that debt. You could take all of his assets. The car, the furniture, even the clothes he's wearing. Ms. Johnson was silent for a long moment. She looked at the Eiffel Tower. She looked at the darkening sky. She looked at her own hands. Wrinkled, but strong. Destiny, she thought, had a very peculiar sense of humor. Dr. Henrique, I don't want to destroy anyone. That's not what I'm looking for. I know, Ms. Johnson. I'm just informing you of the options you have. But I want one thing. I want Mark to know that someone bought his debt. I want him to know that there's someone out there who could destroy him if they wanted to. Don't tell him who. Don't give him any clues. I just want him to know. I want him to feel the fear that my daughter made me feel when she threw me out on the street. Understood. Ms. Johnson, I'll take care of it. A month later, Mark received a letter. It was a formal letter, on watermarked paper, from a prestigious law firm. It informed him that the debt he had been bought by an anonymous investor, an investor who now owned everything he owed, and that if he didn't pay the full amount in 6 months, he would lose everything. Mark read the letter 3 times. His hands trembled. His heart was beating so hard that he could feel it in his throat. Who was this investor? Why would someone buy a debt like his? What did they want from him? He didn't sleep that night, or the next, or any of those that came. Regina, we have to find your mother. It's urgent. It's the only way to get out of this situation. Why does my mother have anything to do with this? Because the house is in her name. You forgot. If we find her, if we convince her to sign, we can sell the house and pay off this debt. It's our only option. But Regina couldn't find Ms. Johnson, because Ms. Johnson didn't want to be found, because Ms. Johnson was in Paris, eating croissants and living the life she always deserved. And while Regina and Mark despaired, Ms. Johnson was deciding. 10 months after the expulsion, sitting on a park bench in London, watching the ducks swimming in an artificial lake, Ms. Johnson made a decision. She was going to go back. Not for revenge. Revenge was something small, petty, unworthy of the woman she had become. Revenge was for people who hadn't found their own worth. And Ms. Johnson had found hers. She was going to go back for closure, for dignity, for the opportunity to look her daughter in the eyes and tell her the truth, the whole truth. She called Dr. Henrique that same afternoon. Doctor, prepare everything. I'm going back to Brazil. When? Ms. Johnson. On the anniversary of the expulsion, exactly 1 year later. I want them to know that I remember every detail of that night. I want them to know that I haven't forgotten. Dr. Henrique orchestrated everything with military precision. The private jet, a white Gulfstream that Ms. Johnson had chartered for the occasion, the luxury car that would be waiting at the airport, the necessary documentation for the upcoming meeting. And Sonia, the loyal neighbor, was informed of the plan. Ms. Johnson, this is going to be something to see, something that no one will ever forget. Sonia, I want to ask you a favor. I want you to film everything. I want a record of this moment. I want to be able to look back and remember that I finally stood up for myself. You can count on me. I'll be there. The day arrived. A Thursday in July. Exactly 1 year after the coldest night of Saida's life. A year of travels and of discoveries, of healing. A year of finding herself. The jet landed at 3 in the afternoon at the city's executive airport. It was a white Gulf Stream, gleaming under the Brazilian winter sun. The turbines slowed their rotation. The door opened slowly. And then Saida appeared. She stood at the top of the jet's stairs, gazing at the horizon. She seemed like a different person, not because she had changed physically. She was still the same black woman, with a large build, her white hair cropped short. But there was something different in her posture, in the way she looked at the world. It was the posture of someone who had found her worth, of someone who no longer asked permission to exist, of someone who had walked through the most beautiful places on the planet and discovered that she too was beautiful, inside and out. She wore a dark blue dress, simple yet elegant. There were no flashy jewels, no exaggerated makeup, nothing that screamed money, but everything that spoke of dignity. She descended the stairs calmly, each step firm, each step full of meaning. The car was waiting. A black Mercedes, spotless, with a uniformed chauffeur. Carlos, who in addition to being the jet's pilot was a friend of Dr. Henrique, opened the door for her with a respectful bow. "Good afternoon, Ms. Johnson. The vehicle is ready." "Thank you, Carlos. Let's go." As the car moved through the city streets, Saida looked out the tinted window. Everything seemed the same. The same buildings, the same streets, the same people rushing from one place to another without noticing the beauty around them. But everything seemed different, because she was no longer the same. The woman who had left that house with a suitcase and garbage bags was not the same woman who was returning in a private jet and a Mercedes, not because of the money, because of the internal transformation that no amount of money can buy. Sonia waited on the street corner as they had arranged, dressed discreetly with her cell phone in hand, ready to record every second of what was about to happen. The Mercedes stopped in front of the house, that house that Saida had bought with her hard work, that house from which she had been thrown out like trash, that house that everyone now knew had always been hers. Saida got out of the car with the grace of a queen. Carlos opened the door with professionalism. She adjusted her dress, took a deep breath, and walked towards the entrance. Each step was a statement. Each step said, "I'm here. I survived. I flourished. And now you're going to know the truth." She rang the doorbell. On the other side of the door, Regina was having one of the worst days of her life. Debt collectors wouldn't stop calling. The phone rang every 5 minutes with unknown numbers. Mark was locked in his room since morning, without eating, without talking, just drinking and lamenting. Lucas had been suspended from school for bad behavior. He had argued with a teacher and almost assaulted him. The principal was demanding an urgent meeting with the parents. Only Amanda seemed to maintain any sanity in that house. She was in her room, studying for exams, trying to ignore the chaos around her, trying to survive. When the doorbell rang, Regina sighed in frustration. It was probably another debt collector, probably someone wanting money she didn't have. She opened the door angrily, ready to send whoever it was to hell, and the world stopped. In front of her stood her mother, the mother she had thrown away like trash a year before, the mother she thought was living on the streets or in a nursing home, or perhaps dead. But this was not the same woman. This woman radiated something Regina had never seen: confidence, peace, power. This woman looked like a queen disguised as a common person. Mom? Saida didn't respond immediately. She just looked at her, looked at the daughter she had raised with so much sacrifice, at the daughter who had called her a dead weight. at the daughter who had left her on the street with garbage bags, and she felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not love. Just an immense calm. The calm of someone who had already processed the pain and now just wanted to finish what she started. "Hello, Regina. I came to get some things." Regina didn't know what to say. Her brain wasn't processing what her eyes saw. Her mother, dressed elegantly, getting out of a Mercedes, with a uniformed chauffeur waiting in the street. "But where did you... Can I come in? Or are you going to leave me at the door like last time?" It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of an entire year of pain. Regina moved automatically, making space for Cedar to enter the house that had always been hers. The house was different, more disorganized, more sad, more decadent. The luxury that once seemed natural now seemed forced, false, desperate. There was dust on the furniture, dirty dishes in the kitchen, a smell of cigarette and alcohol that didn't exist before. Mark appeared at the top of the stairs, attracted by the voices. He was disheveled with a grown beard, his eyes red from not sleeping for days. When he saw Kaida, his face lost all color. He turned white as paper. Miss Johnson." "Hello, Mark. Long time no see. It seems things aren't going very well here." It wasn't a question. It was an observation. An observation that Mark couldn't deny. Lucas came out of his room, attracted by the noise. He walked down the stairs with his cell phone in hand, not paying much attention. When he saw his grandmother, he stopped dead in his tracks. "Grandma, you're back." There was something in his voice, something that Cedar didn't expect. Something like relief. As if, somewhere deep down, Lucas had hoped that his grandmother would return. "Yes, Lucas, I'm back." And then Amanda appeared. She ran down the stairs, almost tripping on the last steps, with tears already running down her face. "Grandma. Grandma, you're back. Thank God you're back." She ran towards Cedar and hugged her. With all the strength of her 14 years, with all the desperation of a year of guilt and longing, she cried. She cried, like she'd wanted to cry a year ago, when she saw her grandmother leave with a suitcase and couldn't do anything, because she was afraid of her mother. Miss Johnson hugged her back. She felt her granddaughter's body trembling against hers. She felt the tears soaking her new dress, and for a moment, just for a moment, she felt that maybe not everything was lost. "It's okay, sweetheart. Grandma's okay, but Grandma's here." They stayed embraced for a long moment. Regina watched, unsure what to do. Mark had come downstairs and was standing in the living room, motionless, like a statue. Finally, Miss Johnson released Amanda and looked her in the eyes. "I need to talk to your mother and father, sweetheart. It's a conversation for adults. Can you wait in your room?" Amanda nodded, wiping away her tears. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to leave her grandmother again. But she understood that there were things that needed to be said. "I love you, Grandma. I love you too, Amanda. More than you can imagine." Amanda went upstairs, looking back at every step, as if she feared her grandmother would disappear again. When they were alone, adults facing adults, Miss Johnson sat down on the living room sofa, calmly, with the authority of someone who has complete control of the situation. "Sit down. We have a lot to talk about." Regina and Mark sat down on the other sofa, facing her. Lucas remained standing, in a corner, unsure whether to stay or leave. Miss Johnson took a folder out of her bag, a thick folder, full of documents. She placed it on the coffee table. "First of all, I want you to see a few things." She opened the folder. The first document was the deed to the house, original, with all the seals and signatures. "This house is mine. It's always been mine. I bought it in 1998, with money I earned and saved, for years. It wasn't Mark's father who helped with the down payment. It was me. Every penny came out of my pocket. Regina looked at the document. Her name didn't appear anywhere. Only her mother's name, Aparecida Santos. But I always thought, you thought what you wanted to think, Regina. You thought that your poores cook was a black was fat, old mother, couldn't have anything of value. You thought I depended on you. But the truth was exactly the other way around. Ms. Johnson moved on to the next document. It was a bank statement, a statement that showed a balance of $8 million. Regina felt the floor open beneath her feet. The number was so large that her mind refused to process it. 8 million. Her mother, the cook. What? What is this? It's my bank account, honey. $8 million. Earned legally. Invested intelligently. Accumulated over 30 years. Money I never told you I had. Why? Why did you never tell me? Ms. Johnson looked her directly in the eyes. Because I wanted to know if you loved me for who I am, or for what I have. I wanted to know if my daughter's love was real or conditional. Now I know the answer, and it's the most painful answer I could have received. Regina began to cry. Mum, I didn't know. If I had known, and there's the problem, Regina. If you had known, what? You would have treated me better? You would have respected me more. You would have called me Ms. Johnson instead of a dead weight. Ms. Johnson paused, letting the words sink in. But I didn't want your bought love. I didn't want your rented respect. I wanted to be loved for who I am, an oldie, black, fat woman who worked her whole life to give her daughter a better life. And that wasn't enough for you. My love wasn't enough. My sacrifice wasn't enough. Only money would be enough. Mark, who had remained silent until then, tried to speak. Ms. Johnson, we can resolve this. It was a misunderstanding. The pressure, the stress, the financial problems. We weren't thinking straight. Shut up, Mark. It was the first time Ms. Johnson had spoken to her son-in-law like that, with authority, with contempt. And he fell silent immediately, like a dog who receives an order from his owner. You are a coward. You let your wife throw her own mother out on the street, and you didn't say a word. You didn't lift a finger to stop her. You didn't even have the decency to pretend that you cared. You stood there, with your arms crossed, watching as if it were a TV show. Mark lowered his eyes, unable to meet the gaze of the woman he had helped to destroy. You're not even worth the effort of my contempt. Ms. Johnson took another document out of the folder. This one was different. It had the logo of a large company, a company that Mark recognized immediately. You recognize this company, Mark? Mark looked at the paper. His face, which was already pale, turned ashen gray. This is the company that bought my debt. Exactly. And this company belongs to a holding company, of which I am the majority shareholder, which means that, technically, you owe me money. Every penny you owe to me. Mark looked like he was going to faint. He leaned back against the sofa, breathing heavily. I could execute that debt right now. I could take everything you have, the car in the garage, the clothes you're wearing, the furniture in this house. Even though the house is mine and not yours, I could leave you out on the street, exactly like you left me. She paused dramatically. But I'm not going to do that. Regina raised her eyes, a spark of hope in her gaze. Not out of kindness towards you, not out of forgiveness, because I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe never. I'm not going to execute the debt, because revenge is something small, something petty, something that only people who don't know their own worth need. And I'm already too big for small things. Then, what do you want? Ms. Johnson closed the folder. I want you to understand something. Both of you. And you too, Lucas. Lucas, who had remained silent in his corner, stepped forward. Money doesn't buy dignity. It doesn't buy respect, and it doesn't buy love. You treated me like trash when you thought I had nothing. But my worth was never in my bank account. My worth is here. She placed her hand over her own heart. In who I am, in what I built, in the love I gave, even when it wasn't returned. In the 45 years, I worked to feed strangers, while my own family treated me like an employee. In the nights, I didn't sleep, taking care of fevers, of children who now don't even look at me. In the dreams I gave up so that my daughter could dream. That is my worth, and no paper, no deed, no bank account can measure that. The silence in the room was total. No one moved. No one breathed heavily. Ms. Johnson put the documents in the folder. I'm going to sell this house. It's mine, and I have every right to do what I want with it. You have 30 days to find another place to live. Regina sobbed. Mom, please, we need to talk. We're done, Regina. The money from the sale will be divided among my grandchildren, so that Lucas and Amanda can pay for their studies, have a future, build something of their own. You two won't see a single penny. And Mark, I'm going to give you a year to pay off the debt, interest-free. Not because you deserve it, because I don't want my grandchildren to see their father destroyed. But if you don't pay in a year, I'm going to foreclose. And I won't have any mercy. Mark nodded, mute, unable to form words. Ms. Johnson got up from the sofa. She walked slowly toward Regina, approaching her daughter, so close that she could see every wrinkle of expression, every tear running down her face. I've loved you my whole life, Regina. I loved you when you didn't deserve it. I loved you when you made me feel less than nothing. I loved you even when you threw me out on the street with a suitcase and garbage bags. But a mother's love has a limit, and you found that limit a year ago. I don't hate you. Hate would be giving you too much importance. But I'm not going to forget either. And I'm definitely not going to forgive, just because you now know I have money. Regina wept silently, tears streaming non-stop. If you ever want to rebuild our relationship, it'll have to be on my terms. You'll have to prove that you've changed, really changed, not faking it. You'll have to earn my trust back. And that, if it ever happens, is going to take years, maybe a lifetime. Ms. Johnson turned and walked toward the stairs. Amanda, you can come down now, honey. Seconds later, Amanda appeared at the top of the stairs. She'd been listening to everything. Her eyes were red from crying. Ms. Johnson extended her hand to her granddaughter. You, my love, have always been different. You always saw me when no one else did. You always loved me when no one else loved me. You've always had a good heart that your mother didn't know how to nurture. But that exists despite everything. Amanda came down the stairs and took her grandmother's hand. I want you to come live with me. If you want to, of course. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to pay for your studies. I'm going to give you everything you need to build the life you deserve, but not because I have money, because I love you. And because you've always loved me for real. Amanda looked at her mother. She looked at her father. She looked at her brother. And then she looked at her grandmother. There was no doubt in her eyes, no hesitation. I want to go with you, Grandma. Please, take me with you. Regina started to protest. Amanda, you can't. You're underage. I'm your mother. You're my biological mother, but you were never my real mother. It was Grandma who raised me. It was Grandma who told me bedtime stories. It was Grandma who taught me how to cook. It was Grandma who was there for me when I was scared. And it was Grandma who I saw being thrown out on the street, unable to do anything because I was afraid of you. Amanda stood tall, facing her mother for the first time. I'm not afraid anymore, Mom. Not of you. Not of anyone. I'm going with Grandma. And if you want to stop me, you're going to have to call the police. And we'll see what they think when they find out how you treated your own mother. It was the first time Amanda had found her voice. And in that moment, Ms. Johnson saw something that made her smile inside. She saw a young woman breaking the cycle. She saw the next generation rejecting the pattern of abuse. She saw hope. Regina said nothing. She couldn't. Because she knew Amanda was right. Because she knew that if she called the police, the whole story would come out. And she would be the villain, not the victim. A week later, everything was arranged. The house was put up for sale. A high-end realtor took over the process. There were interested buyers from day one. Amanda moved in with Ms. Johnson to a spacious apartment, overlooking the ocean, in one of the best neighborhoods in the city. She had her own room, decorated in the colors she chose. She had books. She had space to study. She had peace. Lucas surprisingly apologized to his grandmother. He came to the new apartment, alone, without his parents. He sat in front of Ms. Johnson with his head down and his eyes wet. "Grandma, I know I didn't do anything to help you. I know I sat by while Mom treated you like that, and I know that makes me an accomplice. I don't have an excuse. I just want you to know that I'm sorry, that I hate myself for being so cowardly, and that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be different." Ms. Johnson looked at him. She saw the baby she had held, the child she had fed, the teenager who had been lost in screens and indifference. "Lucas, you're younger. You made mistakes, everyone does. The difference is in what you do afterward. If you want to be different, show it. With actions, not words. Come here on the weekends. Learn to cook with me. Get to know your real grandmother. And maybe, over time, we can rebuild something." Lucas nodded, tears running down his face. It was the first time Ms. Johnson had seen him cry since he was a little boy. From that day on, Lucas came every Saturday. He learned family recipes. He listened to stories of the past, rebuilding, little by little, a relationship that was almost lost forever. Regina and Mark had to rent a small apartment in a much less prestigious neighborhood. No pool, no garden. So none of the luxury they had become accustomed to. They didn't lose everything. Ms. Johnson didn't foreclose on the debt. She gave Mark the promised time, interest-free, as she had said, not out of kindness toward him, because she didn't want her grandchildren to see their father completely destroyed. Mark found a job. It wasn't a glamorous job. It wasn't a successful entrepreneur's job. It was a normal job, an employee, with a fixed salary and regular hours, but it was honest. And it was enough to pay off the debt little by little. Regina sought help. She started therapy with a psychologist specializing in family relationships. She began to face the demons that had made her treat her mother that way. 6 months after Ms. Johnson's return, Regina appeared at her mother's apartment, alone, without makeup, without jewelry, in simple clothes. "Mum, can we talk?" Ms. Johnson let her in, offered her coffee, as she always did with visitors. They sat on the living room sofa, overlooking the ocean that Ms. Johnson loved to see every morning. There was a long silence, heavy, laden with unspoken things. "I've been in therapy. For the past few months I've been seeing a psychologist, and she's helped me understand a lot of things." Ms. Johnson listened without interrupting, sipped her coffee, waited. I was always ashamed of you. Not because you were a bad mother. Because you were different from my friends' mothers. Black, overweight, a cook. In my stupid little girl's head. That made me less than the others. And that shame turned into anger. An anger that had nothing to do with you, but that I took out on you. Regina was crying as she spoke. The words came out between sobs. "What I did to you was unforgivable, and I know. And I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness, because I don't deserve it. I came to tell you I'm sorry, sincerely, truly, and that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be a better person." not to win you back, but because I finally understood how horrible I was, how cruel, how unfair. Miss Johnson looked at her daughter. She saw the baby she had held, the little girl she had protected, the teenager she had tolerated, the woman who had destroyed her, and she saw something else, something she didn't expect to see. She saw honesty. For the first time in many years, her daughter was being genuinely honest. I don't forgive you yet, Regina. Maybe I'll never completely forgive you. Some wounds are too deep to heal, but I hear you, and that for now is a start. Regina nodded, wiping away her tears. Just a start. But for someone who thought there was no way back, a start was more than she could have hoped for. Today, 2 years after that terrible night in July, things are very different. Ms. Johnson lives with Amanda in a beautiful apartment overlooking the ocean. The girl, now 16, is in one of the best schools in the country. Her grades are excellent. Her future is bright. She wants to be a psychologist. She wants to help people who have gone through what her grandmother went through. She wants to be the voice of those who have no voice. Lucas comes over every weekend. He's changed completely. He abandoned his obsessive video games. He started volunteering at a nursing home, taking care of elderly people who, like his grandmother, deserve love and respect. He says it's his way of making up for what he didn't do when he should have. Regina and Mark are still together, not for romantic love, which probably was never very strong, but for commitment, for the decision to rebuild something from the rubble they themselves created. Mark worked hard and paid off the debt in 10 months, 2 ahead of schedule. Ms. Johnson acknowledged the effort, although she didn't forget what he had allowed to happen. Regina is still in therapy. She visits her mother once a month, always with prior permission, always respecting the boundaries. The relationship is distant but respectful. They are in the process of healing, although no one knows if they will ever reach the end of the road. And Sonia, the neighbor who took in Ms. Johnson on her darkest night, has become her best friend. They travel together twice a year. They laugh together. They support each other, proving that real family doesn't always come from blood. The video that Sonia recorded on the day of Ms. Johnson's return has millions of views online. With the faces of Regina and Mark blurred out of respect for their privacy, it shows the moment a woman reclaims her dignity. It shows the arrival of the jet, the descent from the stairs, the confident walk towards the door of her own home. The comments are moving, people from all over the world sharing their own stories of overcoming, elderly people who were abandoned by their families, mothers who gave everything and received nothing, people who found in Ms. Johnson's story the strength to keep going. Ms. Johnson decided to allow the video to be published for a simple reason. She wanted the world to see that dignity is priceless, that karma exists, that it's never too late to rebuild yourself. In the end, what do we learn from the story of Ms. Johnson? We learn that the value of a person is not in their body, in their color, in their age, or in their bank account. It's in their character, in how they treat others, in how they face adversities, in how they get up after falling. We learn that true love has no conditions, and that when someone only loves you when you have something to give, when you are useful, when you produce something, that love is not real. It's self-interest disguised as affection. We learn that revenge can be sweet, but dignity is much sweeter. Destroying who destroyed you can give momentary satisfaction, but rebuilding yourself, flourishing, showing the world who you really are, that is forever. And we learn that it's never, never, never too late to rebuild your life, no matter how old you are, no matter what they have done to you, no matter how many times you have fallen. There is always a new chapter waiting to be written. Ms. Johnson was 68 years old when she was thrown out on the street. Today she is 70, and she says with a smile on her face that these last 2 years have been the best of her life. Not because she has money. She always had money, saved, waiting for the right moment. Because she has peace, she has dignity, she has true love from people who see her for who she is. She has a granddaughter who adores her. She has friends who respect her. She has a life that is finally worth living. And that, my friends, is worth more than $8 million. Much, much more. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think of someone who treated you badly, if it reminded you of your own strength to overcome, share it. Share it because someone out there needs to hear this today. Someone who is suffering, who is doubting their worth, who is thinking of giving up. And if you are that person, if you are going through something similar, if someone is treating you as if you are worthless, remember, Ms. Johnson, remember that your value does not depend on what others think of you. Remember that one day, somehow, life will give you the opportunity to show who you really are. When that day comes, stand up. Dust yourself off. Take a deep breath and walk with your head held high. Because you deserve respect. You deserve dignity. You deserve to be seen, to be heard, to be loved for who you really are. And no one, absolutely no one, has the right to take that away from you. True family is not measured by the blood that runs in your veins. It's measured by the respect that runs in your hearts. And that is the lesson that Ms. Johnson teaches us today. A lesson we should never forget.